Welcome and thank you Accelerate Her and London Tech Week for inviting us to speak on this panel, The Future of Financial Tech. I'm Bridget Greenwood. I'm the founder of The Bigger Pie and the co-founder of the 200 Billion Club. The Bigger Pie is looking at building gender equity in the blockchain space, and the 200 Billion Club is being able to get more funding to female founders who are UK-based companies. I'm delighted to have with us today Kathleen Brightman, who's the co-founder and CEO of Tezos, Chanel Anser, founder and managing director of Nell Consulting and partner at Cornerstone Partners, Melania Edwards, independent startup and venture fund advisor, and Abby Titcombe, who runs the community at Radical. What I'd love for us to start with is fintech is such a broad subject. So when we're talking about the future of fintech, what does that mean? Does that mean looking at innovation that the banks can't deal with because they have tech systems where the legacy is so encumbered that it's very difficult for them to be able to find innovative solutions? Plus, in large organizations, it's quite difficult to be more innovative. So are we looking at fintech that can fill the gap there when it comes to the existing systems? Or are we looking at saying, actually, we've had financial models that have been built for a select few that serve a select few. And maybe what we should be doing is disrupting what the models look like and how that might be. And also, do we actually need central parties anymore? Do we need the banks? Or can we not, if we can do peer-to-peer, cut out middlemen where they're not serving us? So I'm actually delighted that we might be able to touch on a number of these subjects and more. May I ask each of you to give us a bit of a background, understanding where you've been, where you're at now, and what challenges you're facing. So as you answer in the discussion, we have some sort of reflection points to go from. Kathleen, I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Kathleen Brightman. I'm the co-founder of the Tezos blockchain. That doesn't have a CEO because it's just an open source piece of software at this point, but I was the CEO of the original company that built up a lot of the infrastructure. Yeah, so I mean, I obviously have an answer to this, which is like basically that, new systems are going to arise and do a much better job of managing risk and basically making a more equitable access to financial services. I think that finance is a tool much like education or property rights that allows people to better themselves peacefully. And so I'm a huge fan of making finance more accessible to everyone. And I think cryptocurrencies offer a unique perspective by doing a lot of the things that banks and incumbents used to do very well, but in a better way. Of course, there's a lot of growing pains. It's a very nascent industry. It's been around for maybe 10 years. Less that if you think about it as a professional organization. And I think it's a really long way to go before it usurps Barclays. But that's the radical vision that we're building towards. And I think that it offers a lot of possibility and a lot of opportunities. So I'm obviously very excited to talk about it to an audience of women, because I feel as though we were left out of the first financial revolution, and it might be time for us to glob onto the second.
100% agree with that. Abby, would you like to introduce yourself with a bit of background?
For sure. I'm Abby. I run community at Radical, which is a bunch of different things, but it's really cultivating our project's open source community and managing the partnerships that support the growth of our open source ecosystem. Radical is actually technically not a fintech startup, but it has fintech aspects. It's a decentralized network for code collaboration that has an integration with Ethereum, which is a global open source network that is stewarding a lot of decentralized financial tools, also known as DeFi. I started my career in venture capital, actually, investing across a stack, anything from enterprise open source to fintech, to then almost exclusively crypto and blockchain. And then since then, made my way into the Ethereum ecosystem, drawn by the potential of the open source and decentralized financial ecosystem that was being presented, and have been working there ever since. So as I said, Radical is a peer-to-peer hybrid crypto project that is building for developers who are building open source software that has an integration with Ethereum to tap into kind of the power of the decentralized financial primitives that are being developed in the space. unlocking the potential that these tools have for empowering open source maintainers and contributors to take control of their means of production and distribution of their open source software. So the fintech discussion is really interesting because I think, as Kathleen said, new systems are definitely on the horizon, maybe even here, and these new systems are allowing for more, not only more accessibility, but more composability in how we manage our relationship with money. And so Radical's taking like a very direct approach by saying, here are new tools that you can use that are crypto native to empower your own financial experience in a space that has been shorted by the financial system for a long time, which is open source software. So excited to join the conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Abby. Chanel.
Thanks. Hi, as mentioned, I'm Chanel Answer. I'm the founder and MD of Nell Consulting, and what we are is a boutique consulting firm that specializes in working with leadership firms that are trying to build neobanks or challenger banks. And outside of that, I'm also a partner at Cornerstone Partners, and we are an angel investment group, soon to be a VC fund, and our purpose is to invest in founders led by Black and diverse founders here in the UK. So yeah, very passionate about diversity and fintech, and more importantly, like what the intersectionality is between, you know, both areas, and it's interesting to observe how the market is moving towards addressing that without being intentional. So yeah, happy to be here. So thanks for inviting me to speak on this.
Thank you very much. I'm Melania.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melania Edwards. I'm an active advisor to venture funds and global startups on their fundraising strategies, most recently with 500 Global. I've spent over a decade in international finance roles across the US, Europe, and Asia. Most recently, I was investing strategic capital into rapidly growing startups affiliated with Oxford University as part of the Oxford Angel Fund in San Francisco. Prior to that, I built out HSBC's Venture Capital Coverage Group, where we connected the venture ecosystem to HSBC's global capabilities. I was also a member of HSBC's International Manager Program, which was the bank's executive talent program. I graduated in economics and management from Oxford University, and I'm a big proponent of lifelong learning and making good financial knowledge available to everyone. So feeling very grateful that I can be here with all of you today on such an important topic.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful for me to see such diverse backgrounds and looking at shaping our financial future and shaping our future. And that's something that I would like to do an immediate call out to, is to ask women, we have the opportunity right now to actually build a future that includes the people that we care about, that can include sustainability, that can be much fairer. We've got 2 billion people who are unbanked, let alone underbanked. And we really need women at the design, development, and the deployment table to be able to create the change that we want to see. And I'm absolutely delighted to see the 4 of you who are all doing that. I would like, so inclusivity and diversity is huge. I mean, there are so many, as you said, there are different angles that we can look at it. There are different ways that we can come to the table and solve it. And I think each 4 of you are doing something unique. So can we talk about sort of that topic to begin with? Chanel, I'd love to hear from you, from your angle. So with the 200 billion club, the stats for female-led startups globally is less than 3% of the VC funding, 11% if you're in a mixed startup team, and 89% go to all male funding. But then when you look at Black women, I mean, you barely register on the scale at all. It's horrendous. So can you talk to us more about the work that you're doing in the space that you're in?
Yeah, no, absolutely happy to. So yes, you are right. For Black women, it is horrendous. I think it's something like 0.2% of funding in the UK goes to, you know, businesses led by Black women, which is absurd. Considering if we, you know, we are a panel of all women, we know where our strengths lie as women. You know, we know that we are built to be resilient. We know that when we take on something, we go head first, and, you know, we are really capable of achieving great things, right? And think about how many female founders you know, and then you look at those stats and you're like, actually, this doesn't make any sense. You know, there's clearly some sort of mismatch, right? And then you have to say why is this the case, right? And so if you look at the correlation between the number of businesses kind of started by women and Black women specifically versus kind of their path to sustainability and to scale, the drop-off rate is absurd, right? I don't have the exact stats, but I read a report and it's absurd. And the reason is, you know, why? It's access, right? It's access to finance to continue to fund, you know, what they're trying to work towards and what they're trying to achieve. And so they get to a certain point because they don't have access to the same resources as other groups, particularly, you know, white males in the UK, or they're not afforded to, you know, having family backing or financial backing from family members to push them through. So this continues to be a problem, right? So, you know, if I think about kind of the origins of Cornerstone Partners and why we came together and why we're doing the work we're doing, it's because we looked across the landscape in the UK and we said, well, actually, no one's really helping us. No one's really putting money in Black founders and other founders from diverse backgrounds. So, you know, we don't have that much money, but let's pull together our resources and let's try and solve the problem, right? And so we've been doing so, but we are an angel group, right? So funds are limited, but, you know, it's nice to say that actually a group of partners have been able to deploy over £1 million into, you know, founders led by Black and diverse founders here in the UK. And that's something that we're really proud of, you know, and so that captures that segment of the market, right? And then you move on to the next step. And when you're looking at Black founders, there's a number of reports that have come out in 2020. Cornerstone Partners put out one, Extend Ventures put out one, Google in collaboration with 10 by 10 put out the Black report as well. And it shows that there's something missing at the seed stage, right? There are no investors investing in Black founders at the seed stage. So Cornerstone Partners are like, okay, let's try and solve that again. So we are raising for a £50 million VC fund, and fingers crossed it should be live by Jan 2022. And yeah, the goal is, again, to try and fix a problem that we've identified, which is to invest in founders in that space. But yeah, I say this with a bit of pride, because, you know, so it's good to be able to be in a position to do this, to try and solve our own problems. But it would be nice if we didn't have to solve our own problems, right? You know, if we had other groups kind of working towards solving this problem as well. But, yeah.
Well, and to that, under the 200 billion club, we would love to be able to partner and work with you, because you look at the female stats, as I said, they're awful. And then when you go into different intersectionalities, it just gets worse. So absolutely 100% an ally. And the issue is with some investors, they're like, well, there's a pipeline issue. No, there really isn't a pipeline issue. There's a pipeline issue at Series B, Series C, because you haven't invested in this talent right from the start. And it's like, oh, we're looking for the next unicorn. But why do women do better on crowdfunding, right? Is it because the investors who are looking at them don't understand the value of what they're bringing? But when you put it out to the public, they're clearly saying through crowdfunding that this is a solution that they see that there's a need in the world. So we need to have more women who are investors. We need to have more people of color who are investors, because people naturally like to invest in people that look like themselves. And so we need to redeploy where the money is, help more VCs to be able to hire people with different backgrounds so they can see more opportunities, because the VCs are leaving money on the table by not recognizing these opportunities. It
is. It's a missed opportunity. You know, that's the way I put it. It's a missed opportunity by not investing in women and people of color. You know, it is a missed opportunity. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Bridget. You know, there is a lot of unconscious bias and actually some intentional bias, let's be honest, you know, but there is bias nonetheless. And the only way we're going to solve the problem is making sure that the institutions that invest, right, look like us. That, you know, they look like all of us on this call, because, you know, we don't have those biases, and we'll be more open to really hear and understand the value proposition and, you know, what these founders are trying to achieve. And yeah, they do make more money from crowdfunding because, you know, the accessibility pool is wider. You know, people like us are looking at these crowdfunding platforms and the opportunities there, hence why, you know, women and people of color tend to do better on them.
Melania, you're nodding away there emphatically. I'd love for you to have the opportunity to add to that.
Yeah, it just fills me with a lot of joy to hear this conversation. And I think that we're really fortunate to have organizations such as Accelerate Her in the UK, or in the US, there are organizations such as All Raise, which really help female founders and female investors. So I think the first part of the problem is almost being solved. And that would be the awareness that there is an issue. I think now that we've acknowledged that there aren't enough female investors and there historically weren't enough female founders, like, yes, we know that now. Now we can do something about it. So I think really working together, supporting other female executives, other female founders, other female investors, it is really key. We have to work together on this to keep the momentum going. So I think I'm nodding along enthusiastically because I really want people to get involved in these organizations. I think, Chanel, the organization that you're part of is phenomenal, and I'm definitely keen to learn more about it because it's organizations such as these, communities such as these that will help us together.
And as a startup and venture fund advisor, what sort of startups are you seeing, and are, in terms of what problems they're bringing, that they're looking to solve and bring into the marketplace, but also in terms of the types of people who are founding these companies?
Yeah, so I have a very unique perspective on it because I tend to advise a lot of international startups. So particularly those coming from Asia and looking to expand to Europe or the US. So one interesting point that I've realized is really the cultural differences and making sure that these incredible startups, whether they're coming from South America, whether they're coming from Asia or Africa, sometimes these are underrepresented regions, but their technology is phenomenal. The founding teams are so strong, they're so hardworking, but it's really making sure that they are able to connect with investors in the regions that they're looking to expand into. And many times that's a communication point and really adapting to the local market. So that's what I've been doing a lot of advising on fundraising strategies. But really, I've been very impressed with the quality of founders from around the world. And I think we really have to pay attention and looking at models that have worked in different regions. So for example, Paystack was the Stripe of Africa and then got acquired by Stripe. I mean, what a phenomenal business, what phenomenal founders. And we just need to pay attention, not just to the UK, not just to the US, but across the world. So those are the key points I would want to raise.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like us to be able to touch on at some point on here is how, let's be aware of where there are opportunities for leapfrogging for people who don't have any systems that they have to sort of build on, that they can just start from scratch. So that's two ways that both of you are looking at how to invest in the founders who are creating these incredible solutions and bringing them out to the world. Kathleen, in terms of how you're approaching it, and can you explain, can I give you the task of kind of explaining what the decentralized, what blockchain, what Tezos is doing in layman's terms, so that we can understand, depending on our knowledge of blockchain or not,
Sure.
how you're taking that?
Right. So Tezos is a cryptocurrency. It's a smart contract platform, in many ways akin to Ethereum. One key difference is that Tezos allows token holders in the network to basically participate in an upgrade process, which is completely decentralized. To date, it's upgraded 7 times seamlessly. It's been everything from economic protocol changes to technical efficiencies that are wrought up on the network. So we're really proud of that. We think basically at the core of a decentralized protocol, there's governance. And ultimately, we're trading in a very centralized system for hopefully a decentralized one. And at the core of that is community ratification at the end of the day. So the participation in Tezos in order for a new protocol change to be ratified is a very high threshold of consent testing. And so it's really cool that we've done that several times in the ecosystem without any error or folly. It's funny, I mean, in terms of, kind of bringing people to the table, we explicitly give everyone who owns a piece of the network a voice in its direction. And so we think that's long-term very good for diluting the risk of basically some charismatic leader taking things over and over-promising and under-delivering and leaving the network in stasis. And that's the motivation for the cryptocurrency project. And then functionally, you have like the way that this has actually been materialized, which is kind of fun because it's a little bit of politicking amongst a bunch of different groups. It's funny because you mentioned kind of diversity in work, and I really for a while I tried to like co-opt my girlfriends who were like kind of interested in finance into like doing the crypto thing. And then I realized, like, actually, the talent base there is pretty terrible. So you're better off just like supporting a project by buying a token and programming yourself. And maybe you don't get too involved in the actual actual space if you don't want to basically deal with a lot of abuse. But it's gotten a lot better over the last few years. So anyway, I like Tezos insofar as like it is very inclusive in the sense that by definition, everyone who owns a token in the network has some say in its some say in its evolution. With that thread is basically a bunch of different people actually jockeying in the realm of ideas rather than just basically making it a sort of sociopathic contest of charisma.
So can you talk to us about some of the real use cases that Tezos is using or is being used by Tezos on the
the things that like we get the most press about are things like NFTs, so non-fungible tokens, basically having a token that represents a right to ownership in some way or form, or a certificate of ownership effectively on the blockchain. The largest marketplace for art in terms of daily active users is on Tezos. It's a project called Hikek which we're very proud of, which has attracted a lot of AI and generative artists across the globe. And initially they were interested in Tezos because of its low ecological impact. Tezos is what's called proof of stake as opposed to a traditional consensus algorithm called proof of work, which is what Bitcoin and Ethereum have. And so they were attracted to it by the ecological impact, but then also the Tezos network has worked really hard to preserve low fees for basically providing computation to the network. Or using computation on the network. And so it's a combination of like, it's very cost effective and it's also very eco-friendly. So that's really thrived. And then there's a number of financial use cases. So cryptocurrencies are really good at basically giving a way for people to come to consensus on a source of truth when there's potentially conflicting parties at play. And so financial use cases are an obvious best fit for it. So we have sort of a decentralized finance ecosystem that's up and thriving, but it's nothing terribly interesting. Most of the DeFi use cases I find are just basically forms of gambling in one form or another. But we effectively have some real world use cases with security tokens being offered from large, real estate developers and things like that in foreign jurisdictions where they want to attract outside capital, but they have trouble basically showing that they're going to abide by a certain rule path or a certain cap table in order to do that. So using a blockchain as kind of a third-party arbiter that you can't like fake has been an interesting set of use cases for more emerging markets. And of course, there are some experiments with like the central bank of France to do things like put a central bank digital currency on Tezos. But I think that's more of a validation of the rigor of the technology than it is sort of a reflection of the radical ideas behind it, because candidly, cryptocurrencies are meant to kind of be in defiance of the existing financial system, not a part of it. So all I have to say, like, I'm really proud of the technology and I'm really proud of the way it's evolved. It's gone in a few different directions from like very artistic to very financially rigorous applications. And my hope is that, it continues to surprise me and that, we get to see a bit more radical ideas that I wouldn't have expected. Because right now, I would not have expected AI generative art to be the main use of the network, but here we are. Yeah.
That's fascinating. And the word radical I do find is used. In fact, I put it when we were talking about, some of the topics and questions we might put in here with blockchain, with cryptocurrency, with the decentralized, also comes radical responsibility. And I'm really fascinated by that side of things as well, because we've allowed technology and function and our busy lives to allow us to do things really easily without thinking about them. And I think that actually it's good to have a stop and a thought and a conscious decision before you make decisions with your money, before you make decisions with where you spend it, before you make decisions that ultimately impact all of us through one way or another in terms of consumption and sustainability. So Abby, so yes, of course, your community is called Radical. Yes, can you tell us more about, you know, what you're most excited about in terms of the changes that are happening? So we've got, you know, Chanel is looking to make sure that we can have more people that look like her being funded, which is what I think all of us need, is more solutions for people that look like us. How is Radical addressing that? Is it addressing that?
Yeah, for sure. And we have been saying the word radical a lot, and I think it's funny because radical, the way that our project is spelled, is RADICLE, which is actually a botanical term, which means the first sprout from the seed, which is a very poetic term that I think represents a lot of things that our project wants to represent, but also this whole conversation represents, which is how can you kind of be stewarding an ecosystem and cultivating it instead of just capitalizing it. And I think that kind of speaks to a lot of stuff that's happening in our space, Radical, and in the crypto space, Web3 space in general, which is cultivating an open source ecosystem. One that is inherently online, and you could say potentially more accessible because it is based online. And so I think that this whole conversation reminds me a lot of research that I have been doing into, you know, like diversity and inclusion in open source spaces. As someone who's cultivating an open source community, there is so much interesting research that has gone into like hacking diversity in open source communities, where the rules and the institutions are different because everything is entirely online. It's not a LinkedIn profile, it's a GitHub handle, you know, and I think that this has obviously has problems and barriers in its own. There's this really great book that kind of evaluates these problems called Hacking Diversity, actually, by Christina Hester, or Christina Dunbar Hester, I think is the name. Would really recommend. It's a really good read. But I think that this taps into like the social responsibility that you have when you're creating an open source ecosystem, one that is not entirely based in these professional identities that are laced with different unconscious biases, which drive capital flow, like in venture capital, and how we've seen, and I saw when working at a VC firm myself. But also kind of creates a new space to kind of redefine what inclusion means in these spaces, and focusing in on accessibility as well. So like that being said, like I think that in crypto, and I think what Kathleen was saying taps into it, is that there obviously has been a ton of problems with diversity in this space, but also a ton of opportunity to kind of redefine what the space is and what the rules are. And so I've been really empowered to see the use of these newly generated capital flows and the way that people are tapping into them and deploying them into more modularized ecosystems. So instead of having these like gate-kept flows of venture capital or private capital, you're seeing kind of like a spray of different capital that's newly generated, being pushed into communities of artists, of developers, of hackers. And those spaces are again defined by online identities instead of traditional, you could say, like meet space, IRL, and real life identities. And so I think that this is really powerful. I think it's a little bit more chaotic because I think that we run into the issues that I think open source communities have run into for a long time, which is what are the grounds of interaction? How do you behave with each other on the internet? And when you don't have a real identity to kind of back, you may not treat others the way that you should. And I think that this is a whole discussion in itself. But I think that it's very empowering also to see the experiments with funding that we're seeing specifically in the Ethereum space around, you know, also anything from culture to finance. There's examples include like protocol treasuries from big DeFi protocols, decentralized finance protocols, being used to fund grant programs, which can be distributed among the ecosystem, where it's tapping into, just like very free-flowing smaller capital allocations that are being continuously flowed into the space to strengthen the resilience of the ecosystem as a whole. Another include, specific Discord servers that are for, there's one called Mint Fund, which is an art fund for funding LGBTQ and other underrepresented communities of artists who are looking to get onboarded to Web3 by offsetting their costs, and specifically trying to take a focus away from North America and Europe and focus on other parts of the world. And these are being funded by, larger crypto companies. So I think that there is, that being said, like where Radical sits is by saying there's all of these open source tooling that you can use and apply to your own use case. And it's about making those tools as accessible and composable as possible, so people, communities, companies can take them and apply them to direct capital and redesign the value flows that they have around the way that they're funding and empowering their communities. And so I think that that's where Radical wants to stick specifically for developers, is giving developers a new way to kind of fund their own work, and doing that in a way that's accessible, like I said, composable, and very simple and clear cut. So even if you're not a Web3 crypto native pro, you can be onboarded and use these tools to fund your work.
That's really fascinating. Can I just say, if you have something to add, please don't wait for me to sort of come to you in turn. Please do add into the conversation. We're all grown women with mature insights, and I wouldn't want to miss out on those. But Abby, can I ask you? So this is something that really interests me. In the crypto space, you can have projects that are funded by people who are funding them where we don't know their identity. Now, bearing in mind, Chanel, that we understand that when the identity of the founder is revealed, and we have social norms that kick in, and unconscious bias that kicks in, and sometimes conscious bias that kicks in, is this something you think that we should be able to exploit to allow more women to come through and have access to the capital without that bias? Or is it quite difficult, really? Because the way that people speak, I mean, with the Bigger Pie, I basically have a community of incredible leaders across the globe who are working in blockchain, and I would love to have you to join us. And the language in our group, in our community, is hugely different to when I go to a community that is mostly dominated by men. So I guess it's a two-part question. Is one, do you think there's opportunity where you don't have to reveal who you are to get more equality into those who get the grants? And are you seeing that? And two, are you really hiding your gender? Because there are so many other aspects of how we communicate and what we do that might reveal that.
Yeah, I think that I personally, as I said, I think it's a double-edged sword. I personally think that there's tons of opportunity in the space of being able to refocus identity in terms of your contributions to an open source project. But I think that history has shown in the open source ecosystem that even that and equality in anonymity in open source ecosystems has not been enough to generate justice for different underrepresented parties. So I just want to say that I do think that it's a double-edged sword, but on the optimistic side of this, I do think that there's tons of opportunity in how people are able to leverage the metaverse, this online world, and the projects that are happening within them that are driven by community governance and community participation in a decentralized network. There's tons of opportunity for underrepresented parties to contribute and empower the communities as a whole. And I think that a good example of this is what we're seeing in this kind of broad space, which is governance. Kathleen, you were just mentioning this, but when a community is able to participate in the direction of a project, whether that be upgrades to smart contracts or that be distributions of capital via a grants program, you start to realize that there is so much social infrastructure that is necessary to actually do that effectively. And I have found that there's been a whole new space that's carved out for communicators and individuals to come in and support the development and the iteration of that social infrastructure. And a lot of these individuals who I've been working with are women, right? And who are coming in and starting to create a more inclusive and accessible space for people online to communicate with each other in the collective goal of moving a project forward. And so I think that this opportunity space is a little bit different than the traditional open source ecosystems that we've seen in the past. And I think that there's more potential for creating new standards of accessibility and inclusivity within these open source spaces. Also, a lot of new problems that we could talk about forever. But I'm optimistic that there's a lot more space for people to harness these spaces, harness these tools, and take them and apply them to their own communities. And so I think that that's like one thing. It's like fitting into a community, but then the flip side is that you can take these tools and apply them to your own community. So you see people coming together via their identity, their values, or their project that they're building together, and they're using the same tools to fund, empower, or coordinate their own community. So I think that it's also about creating community infrastructure that people can take and harness to apply to their own, part of the internet. So I think it's like there's more space for individuals to come in and create a space in this kind of online anonymous world, but there's also more tools that communities can harness to empower themselves to create more, I guess you could say, substantial spaces for funding, for coordination, and for opportunity.
I couldn't agree more with you, which is why the Bigger Pie exists, because I'm so excited about what blockchain can do and how we can change the way that we choose to give value to something, how we can change the way that we choose to build things. But unless we build it right, I mean, when the internet came out, we thought, yay, democratization. When social media came out, we thought, yay, democratization. And we've ended up with 12 men who own half of the world's global wealth. So, we can be excited about open source, about Web 3.0, but actually, unless we build it for the opportunity that it has now, we need to learn from our mistakes previously. And this is why I will always call out, please, can we have more women at the design, development, and deployment table? So any of you are interested in getting involved in any of the ways that our panel's involved, and I'm sure that you'd be happy for them to reach out so that we can see more women representing this. But this is fintech, right? So if we look at the tech part, in tech, you need engineers. So I'm looking at developing a zero to CTO program for women in Web 3.0, because, in that environment, without engineers, nothing really happens. And I'm doing some research, and I'd love to follow up actually with you, Abby and Kathleen, following this. I went on LinkedIn. Okay, so I know engineers are on GitHub and not on LinkedIn, but the recruiters and everyone else is still kind of on LinkedIn. I went on LinkedIn and I went through blockchain engineer in quotes, so it was looking for those two words combined. And in 300 profiles, I came across 16 women. That's 0.05%. So I guess if we're gonna have more inclusion in the tech side of things, we need more women involved in the tech. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
Other than I completely agree. I completely agree. But there are a number of programs, right, in the UK that are doing the work to push women to sort of, develop careers in this space. But I would say it is definitely more at the entry level. And you are right, it is hard to find senior women in tech in the UK, and more work needs to be done. It is a real challenge.
Kathleen and Abby, how did you come into the space?
How did I get involved?
Yes, I mean you're building a layer 1 protocol. So what engineering background do you have? Do you not have? What have you learned along the way?
I mean, candidly, I would probably never hire anyone who has the title blockchain engineer in their LinkedIn profile, because candidly, that's usually a sign that they're not very serious. So, our experience basically was like, we had this great idea. We wanted to find a team that was really good. So we went to an R&D shop in Paris that was mostly programming language theory PhDs, and we, basically engaged with them directly. There was no like fetishism over like cryptocurrencies and blockchains. In fact, like most of the people who worked in the core protocol for Tezos are very nice French socialists who really don't want anything to do with any of this exotic finance stuff. Which I actually find very endearing. So I think there's a big difference between being ideologically driven and also just being a really good engineer. And sometimes like the two are just not even in the same sphere and don't touch each other. I think when you want, radical inclusion and you really want, to build a community around something, you need to have a shared vision and a shared goal. And that obviously is more of a, management of groups and of people and of purpose. But strictly speaking, like I genuinely don't care if you like banks or you hate banks as long as your code compiles, right? And that's usually a very different value set and a very different personality set from like being really into the mission. So for better or for worse, a lot of the people who come to Tezos as engineers or engineering resources are first and foremost passionate about building really good code, no camel. And secondly, like, sure, they'll indulge like my craziness with the cryptocurrency stuff, but it's like really more about like good engineering. And I think that's why, to date, we haven't really experienced that many issues with the actual core protocol itself. It's like very much like ideology on the side. The entire project is very politically motivated in a way that's extremely hard to divorce from anything else. So it's more about like, how do you execute against those goals? So I think, women and men are good and bad and equally terrible and wonderful at the same things. I do find that the cryptocurrency space, though, for better or for worse, tends to index on passion a bit more than execution. And that's why we've seen a lot of like the follies that we have in the actual protocols, which often are like, often bear the hallmarks of amateurism, but really no one quite cares because they're not underpinning anything big enough for their errors to go noticed by any group that can't just unwind them in a very casual way. One of the largest cryptocurrencies, for example, was down for 8 hours, a few weeks ago, and one can't, well, last week, or maybe it was a few days ago. Time dilation is an issue in quarantine still. But all I have to say, like, one can't fathom TCP/IP going down and everyone just being like, oh, cool, that kind of stinks. I can't, trade my decentralized cats anymore. So for better or for worse, the space is really still going through like a lot of amateurism and experimentation. One thing I'm particularly proud of is that, like, with at least the parts of the Tezos protocol that I have some insight into, the focus is more on good engineering and less on ideology. And I think that's how you get a good engineering group to be very candid. And we do have, quite a few women who've contributed to the protocol. It's just less celebrity oriented, I guess, than some other open source projects.
And Abby, if you could sort of address the engineering side, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. So like I said, I was actually in VC before. I'm not, I don't consider myself a developer, but I found my way into the space, right? Actually through, I came through the Ethereum ecosystem pipeline. So I actually came the approach of getting involved in hackathons. And so I was actually in investing in a space, decided I wanted to build in a space, and then was diving into the network of builders, and was brought in by the accessibility of the Ethereum ecosystem's developer community in terms of global hackathons, in terms of global conferences, being able to jump from place to place in the world, which was afforded by the job that I was in, that was thankfully enough, like helping me make my way and giving me space to kind of dive into these conferences, but being brought in by the accessibility of a space that's saying, see what you can build. Sometimes ideologically, what can you decentralize? Decentralize X, which is, going back to what, like for example, Consensus, which was a big New York blockchain studio dedicated to Ethereum, which was decentralizing every aspect of anything that you could ever think of. While that space was a little bit, chaotic, it also created space for a lot of a space to build and to experiment, and a lot of relationships were made there. And so I actually found that the personal relationships that I made in that journey into the Ethereum ecosystem, which was actually heavily driven by women mentors and relationships, which I think is actually very unique. those women who are now leading a lot of the protocols in the Ethereum space. And we talk about this a lot, about how we came together trying to understand, trying to build together, and are now leading and coordinating a lot of different missions in the space, which I think is really powerful. And a lot of resources that were also started in the space, She256, which was a really great initiative that I've been involved with, which I think tackles this kind of like entry stage opportunity that we have, which is connecting people together, and creating the space to build. So that's how I got involved, and I personally think that that's how I've been trying to get more people involved in Radical, which is participating in hackathons, creating the space within our online community to participate. And I think that it's really great to be able to form a developer community and get people involved through that. And so I've been, I think that that's been a really great way to onboard people. I do think that there is a little bit of issue with this kind of like whole, like search blockchain engineer. Like I think that there is an accessibility issue in terms of the technical resources that revolve around the crypto space. And I think that there hopefully will be some more focus on really onboarding engineers to this new type of development, and that work is kind of happening more at the language level. That work is more happening at the core technological level, as we realize that we really just need to get more great engineers coming in and building code instead of just kind of experimenting with different forks of different projects and stuff. So I think it's been an interesting journey for sure, and I'm really into supporting initiatives like She256, She5, which is another one, that are trying to operationalize that onboarding flow and create more accessibility into the space as well.
Fantastic. So,
I'll say this, like even, there are thousands of developers who know how to build on Ethereum, who know how to build on like any number of layer ones. I would still trust maybe like 15 people with writing a smart contract that underpins like $100 million. Or more, and like it's just a very exclusive club no matter how you cut it. And so like women are just the original computers, like have made great contributions to computer science. But I think it's more like there's a long tail of people who are just kind of useless and don't really write good code anyway. And maybe the focus is more on like just making excellence at this rate, just because there's such a paucity of it.
Yeah, I do think that. What I'm starting to see actually is I feel like that the success of these protocols often, of course, underpins in the code and of course, the security and of that code. But I actually think that what's driving the success of a lot of projects in at least the Web3 in the Ethereum space, because that's where I'm coming from, is the people who are coordinating the value within the space itself, the protocols itself. And so this is like the growth leads, the people who are coordinating governance, who are coordinating the deployment of these treasuries. And I think that down the line, like good engineering, of course, like needs to be there, but I think that there's also this whole social aspect of these projects, which is becoming increasingly more important as we start to see kind of this space mature out of this very, very early phase. And I really am empowered to see women driving the conversation there and really laying into these projects and scaling them as well. And I think that these are really important hires that we're seeing these protocols as they become, again, as they scale. And they're being taken from GPs of different VC firms, you know what I mean, who are coming in and actually like shaping up these protocols. And again, we'll see like kind of what direction that leads. But I am really empowered to see a lot of new women in the space kind of driving the conversation there.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what your thoughts are on women. All the research shows that when you have the women helping to communicate and share what's going on, you get more adoption. So it just shouldn't matter what your motivations are, whether it's purely financial, whether it's more holistic. We just need to be not having so many barriers for women to come in. Melania, when I look at research on women, I know that we're generalizing here, but it seems to be that I think there was maybe it was in Ghana, there was a study done. So a lot of women across the world are farmers. And then the men who are farmers tend to farm cash crops like tobacco, and the women who are farmers tend to farm food crops that you can eat. And when there was a bump year in the cash crops, then they could see an increase in alcohol and tobacco that was bought across the nation. But when there was an increase in the bumper crops, there was an increase of, in GDP of things that basically help to serve the community. So education and clothing and food and things like that. So there tends to be the research that suggests that when we invest in women raise the community up. I would love to hear more about what you've seen in the space that looks around sustainability and that sort of aspect.
Yeah, and there's actually a key word that you said there, which is education. And I think that the discussion that we were just having was absolutely fascinating, because my assumption is that our audience comes from either the very traditional finance background through to all of these innovative technologies. And again, as we were talking about, how do we get more women into this spaces? Is education. And actually a question that I wanted to ask all of you is, especially looking into the blockchain, looking into Ethereum, for example, what would your recommendations be to women in this audience as to how to educate yourselves? Because I think from the discussions we were having, it seems like there's so many opportunities, but where do people start if they have no developer background, if they have no engineering background? What would your recommendations be? Because you talked about farmers and crops, and we can definitely go on to that. But I think also it's how do we educate ourselves today on the future of fintech? So we'd love to get your thoughts on that.
So that's one of the questions that we're quite often asked. So in the bigger pie, we have a resource section and also a community where we welcome leaders and learners to come in. I personally learn best by conversation. So if you can come in, you can ask the questions because you don't know what you don't know. So, and everyone goes down a rabbit hole when they think they come into the space. So how can we make that rabbit hole now that we've got warrants, right, rather than go down some dead ends? There are amazing educators who are women, as well as YouTube and various that are led, other channels that are led by men. And then I think the other thing that Abby touched on as well, and one of the things that we've done is we put together, and I'm sure it's not an exhaustive list, but as much as we could find the women in blockchain or women in crypto communities, we've listed those. So it depends on the angle that you're looking for, because you might be coming through enterprise, you might be coming looking purely at crypto, you might be worried about more about supply chain. So it's such a huge space that the different groups will have different lenses that they look for, and so obviously finding the one that suits where you are at the moment would be very useful. So that's what I would recommend, and I can happily send those resources so they might be able to be submitted with this panel. Abby and Kathleen, obviously you've I'm sure you have some thoughts on it as well.
I mean, I think like what's different about the cryptocurrency space in 2021 as opposed to any other time before is that there's actually a lot of fun ways to get involved that didn't exist in the same playful manner as they did before. So if you just want to know how crypto works and things like this, the thing I always recommend is just buy a token and just, go through the experience of actually having to custody it and like save it and all that fun stuff. So that's an easy way to do it. And then there's a lot of ways to interact with smart contracts on a blockchain through the use of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, as I mentioned before. And there's lots of marketplaces that are like very open and free and transparent and will allow you to play with it as much as you want, whether you want to go into a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, and also want to like pull your resources through that. It's all really fun, and it's a way to basically learn how to do these coordination games, which are ultimately what blockchains are good for. So I would recommend like getting into the NFT art scene, even if you think it's completely stupid and grossly overrated. There's plenty of options for you that are extremely cheap, that are fun, and just playful enough for you to actually get an education out of it without realizing it.
Yeah, I'd +1 on that, is that there's so many ways to play, which can and usually are pretty stupid, but are really great for kind of getting into the space and trying out. what you can do. As I mentioned before, I think hackathons are also a really great way. There's a lot of learning that happens in hackathons, and when hackathons are run right, they're also helping people onboard to technologies, not just creating the space to hack on them. And I actually think that hackathons are a good gateway into different project opportunities. And so there's actually one happening this month in the Ethereum space called ETH Online, which is a month-long hackathon in the Ethereum space where tons of projects are providing developer challenges, workshops, talks, and I think just these are now usually kind of online, so getting involved online is like a really good way to kind of start getting a lay of the land of the space and seeing what people are building. And then I would say that a hot take is that actually there's a huge talent hole in crypto and Web3 right now, because everybody needs good engineers, and so leaning into the engineering resources that even if it's outside of Web3 that are at your disposal, and kind of onboarding to the tech space in general. I think that there's going to be a lot of, and there already is a lot of recruiting that's happening in, like you could say, Web2 outside of crypto, as people are trying to get great engineers into the space and onboard them to the specific technologies. And so I think leaning into those networks is going to be beneficial in the long run as we kind of start to see the two worlds mix. But yeah, I would definitely say hackathons are really fun, and ETH Online is actually like a really good place to get started, at least with the Ethereum ecosystem, and that's happening over the next month.
And I'm just going to mention Summer of Code, which is sponsored by Square, give non-engineers the skills needed to enter the space as engineers. So that's open to all. And then Consensus run a boot camp every year. And we've got 70 places, actually, scholarship places. So depending on, where your background comes from, $1,000 can be an awful lot and a barrier to entry. And Consensus are very generous with their scholarships. And as I say, we've got 70 people across 23 countries running through that program right now. So lots of different ways. And then I think the other thing to mention is transferable skills, right? So it doesn't have to be engineering. It could be marketing. It could be community management. Go and check out the various protocols, and that you can get bounties for them. So rather than even having to buy your first cryptocurrency, you might earn it. And then that allows you to come to that space. So you don't have to pay to play at all in this space, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating, and thank you all for all those insights. I think that's something really actionable for our audience today. But it really does bring into focus the importance of empowering ourselves. And I think Chanel as well, with everything you're doing with Cornerstone, a huge part of that is empowerment. So as women, as diverse founders or investors or operators, like it's really our responsibility to ensure that we're getting the education. And a lot of this, like you said, is available for free, or we can do it in a playful way. But also, we want to encourage that thinking in other people too. And I think that's the power of fintech, because I'm seeing a lot of trends where actually financial education is key, and just good financial sense. So whether you're looking to move into cryptocurrencies, or if it's just managing your own checking account, there's a lot of opportunity in that space. And as women, I just really want to encourage us all to teach others how to manage their money.
Fantastic. And we're coming up to sort of the close of our time. I would love to be able to hear a little bit from each of you, sort of your last remarks. What I do want to mention, though, when you're talking about education and being able to, women to be able to step into their capabilities, there is something called the FinTech Diversity Radar that's going to be launched next month by Findexible. So what they're looking at is it's the first global platform gathering progressive data on women in fintech, so we can understand that the role that women play, where they are, becoming founders, whether they're getting funded, what type of solutions they're bringing to the ecosystem. So I think, again, in terms of education, that's going to be really fascinating to see, and in different regions as well. So if we can see a region that's working well, why don't we go and have a look at best practices like they are doing in communities, Abby, in open source, and bring those to other areas. So Janelle, would you like to sort of give us your closing remarks in terms of what you think that those listening should think about, take home, or an action that they might want to do?
I think representation is really important. There are so many women, both young and old, that maybe are sitting on experience, but maybe don't have the confidence to really break through, or don't even know how to your point, Melania, how to break into a space, and how to be, how to educate themselves, or be amidst a community that will, help them to realize this. So, I think this panel's fantastic. I think the work that Accelerate Her does is fantastic, because, it's all about female empowerment and representation. And then hopefully, some women watching this panel discussion will be like, right, okay, I'm going to go and find a hackathon, right? Because, Abby and Melania and Kathleen have talked about hackathons, and, I'm going to turn up, and maybe that's where I'm going to find my community, or, find an ally that's going to help me to push through. So, yeah, I think representation is important. So I would urge more women in this space to step forward and to speak up. It's really, really important. And I think space, for those of us that are in this space, it's really important that we create space for other women to rise up, and to really be able to add value. Quite often women are put in roles, but we're not actually given a voice, or when we do speak, our voice isn't heard. So I would say women in positions of leadership in the fintech space, in the investing space, and in the spaces that we all operate in, it's really, really important that if we are in a position to create space for another woman to voice her opinion, that we do so, because it's really, really important. But yeah, I'm so happy to hear about the fintech index. Actually, that's amazing. I work with a lot of fintechs outside of my work with Cornerstone Partners. I work with leadership teams to build fintech banks, and quite often it is very male dominated. So we need more female leaders. I'm a consultant, so it is nice to be amidst them, and it is nice for the organization to see a Black woman, amidst the leadership team, leading the build of these banks. But, we need more permanent people there. We need more people to have a seat at Exco, that look like me and look like all of us.
Fantastic. Abby?
Yeah, I think that, Chanel, I agree with everything that you said. I think that it's, I think someone told me that if you can't see it, you can't be it. And I think it's about increasing representation in the space, and pushing and actively pushing for representation in the space whenever we can, creating the space for discussions, creating the space for sharing of resources, and creating more accessible spaces for contributions to the space. And so I think that now things are happening online more than in person. And as I said before, I think that this is potentially, if I'm optimist, an opportunity to create and cultivate more spaces for community discussions like this one that we're having today. I also think that there is more opportunity to just get in touch and create the connections between mentees and mentors. I kind of hate like the concept of mentorship, but I really do think that it is so important to be creating more one-on-one relationships with people who are building, who are working, and in spaces that other people want to break into. And so I think that just creating the more space for these conversations, leaning into the potential that we have with these spaces being online, easier onboarding, easier accessibility, and just bringing in more people to talk about what they do, how they got into it, and sharing resources about how other people can get involved, I think is something that I'd like to see, and hopefully we did a little bit of that today. So thanks for definitely creating the space. Accelerate Her.
Wonderful. Kathleen?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be on repeat, but basically just always had an orientation towards trying to pay it forward. Like I was invited to Accelerate Her because someone saw a talk that I gave. She wasn't involved in the space at all, but she thought it'd be cool for a rising star, spot at Accelerate Her, and that was in 2017. And I've been going every year since. And I always try to think of young women in my network who I could extend an invitation to, because it is really transformative to just basically have someone pull you up and like show you a better group or a better network. So just always have that in mind. And I'd rather be embarrassed because I was too kind to someone than be able to save face because I didn't want to extend my network to someone else. So that's a good orientation to have, and I think that's what makes you a good friend and a good leader.
Amazing. And Melania?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel so grateful to be surrounded by such great thought leaders today. I think this discussion has been really exciting, and we're living in such a great time to do something. So I guess my key takeaway is I really want all of us and all of the audience to just walk away from this talk and feel really inspired and energized. That the power is within them, and you can do something about it today. So go out, join a hackathon, download some research, connect with other amazing women in the industry, because the time is now. So go and do it.
Absolutely. And I'd like to obviously plus one to everything that's being said, but also not just in terms of the hackathon. I think we need more VCs, and there are programs out there looking to be able to support more women, more people of color, more, of the types of founders who aren't getting funded. There are VC programs as well. So, let's look at it from all angles. I have enjoyed this conversation immensely. I will be following up with each of you so I can keep you in my network. And I think I'm going to have to make sure that I'm there on Monday. Thank you very much to everyone who has contributed and for asking us to be involved. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care.